He sat in the lobby like he had taken a wrong turn in life, or at least, that's how everyone around him made him feel. His blazer didn't match the sharp lines of the room, and his shoes weren't shiny enough to reflect the ceiling lights, like theirs did. He held a soft, crumpled cloth bag on his lap, as if it carried something precious or fragile. The man next to him shifted away slightly, as if poverty could rub off. Across from him, 4 candidates dressed in perfect black suits sat whispering. One of them chuckled and leaned in, tapping his phone. "Look at this guy," he whispered. "Looks like he's here to fix the printer, not run a department." The others laughed quietly, except one woman. She didn't laugh, but she didn't speak up either. The man with the cloth bag adjusted his posture. He had prepared for this interview. He had memorized his answers. But now his palms were sweating, and a voice inside his head whispered something he hadn't expected. "What am I even doing here? This place smells like money." He looked around. The walls gleamed. The air smelled like eucalyptus and entitlement. The receptionist hadn't even acknowledged him when he arrived, but had smiled widely at everyone else. Then, one by one, candidates who arrived after him were called in. Still, he waited. Still, he held the bag close. Finally, his name was called. No smile, no handshake. The interview room felt colder than the lobby. The questions came fast, too fast. "What do you actually do? Why haven't you worked for any major firm? Are you familiar with modern systems?" They didn't ask about his purpose, his past, or his why. He tried to answer anyway, but the man across the table was already glancing at his phone before he finished the first sentence. 5 minutes. That was all he got. Not even a thank you. He walked out with the same bag, the same posture, but something inside had shifted. They didn't know. They didn't know that the man they just dismissed was the reason a child named Eli had taken his first steps last year, that he had built an entire center with his own hands and dreams. They didn't know that in a few hours, the founder of their entire company would stand at his front door. Not because he had applied for the wrong job, but because he was the only one truly qualified for something much bigger. His name was Elias Montenegro, and there was nothing flashy about him. No expensive watch, no polished shoes, no diploma from an Ivy League school framed on the wall. But behind that quiet gaze was a storm of experience, and behind those rough hands, decades of compassion shaped into action. Long before he ever sat in that cold corporate lobby, Elias was already changing lives. He had been a school teacher once, in a forgotten town with no name on tourist maps. After losing his only son to a rare neurological disorder, Elias took what most would call grief and turned it into a blueprint for change. He founded the Horizonte Vivo Institute, a non-profit that provided therapeutic and educational support for children with cognitive disabilities. No flashy website, no big PR campaigns, just results. He began with a broken-down bus and a handful of volunteers. Today, Horizonte Vivo has built 6 community centers across 3 states, but Elias never took credit. You'd still find him sweeping floors, reading stories aloud to kids who couldn't speak, or building sensory gardens from discarded wood. There's a story they still tell at the Nova Aurora Center about a boy named Tomas, non-verbal, aggressive, unable to sit still. Everyone had given up on him. Elias didn't. Instead of punishing his outbursts, Elias brought a tiny keyboard every day, played 2 notes, waited, day after day, until one morning Tomas touched the same 2 notes back. That was the beginning. By the end of the year, Tomas was speaking, not perfectly, but joyfully. That's who Elias was. The man with too much heart, and just enough stubbornness to believe that love applied correctly could rewire the human brain. But he wasn't immune to doubt. That night, after the failed interview, he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by files, case studies, grant applications, old photographs of kids he'd helped. He picked up a photo of his son, Mateo. There was a moment, just a second, where his hand trembled. He looked down and whispered, "Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe it's not enough anymore." He didn't mean to say it out loud, but the house was silent. Sometimes even the strongest men need to hear something back, but the photo just stared and the silence stayed. He thought about that lobby, those stares, the laughter, the fake smiles. He thought about how it all seemed designed to erase people like him, men who didn't fit the mold, who didn't wear the right suit, who didn't network, didn't charm. He had built a legacy, but tonight he questioned whether the world still needed it or wanted it. Outside, the street was empty. The only light came from the lamp above his porch. He stayed at the table long after midnight, and just as he was about to turn in for the night, a pair of headlights lit up his driveway. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop. He didn't recognize the car, but when the back door opened and a woman stepped out, tall, poised, elegant, his breath caught for just a second. It was her. One person in the company he had not expected to see, the CEO. At first, Elias didn't move. He just watched her. She stood beneath the porch light like someone standing between two worlds, the world she ruled and the one she had come to remember. There was a softness in her eyes, barely visible beneath the mask of control. She wasn't there for business. "Mr. Montenegro," she asked gently. As if unsure he'd want to hear her voice, he nodded slowly. "Yes, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice low, sincere. "But more than that, I owe you a thank you." Elias opened the door, still in his worn sweater and house shoes. He didn't offer her a seat, not out of rudeness, just shock. She walked in like someone stepping into a church. Then, without waiting for his invitation, she placed a photo on his table. It was of a boy, maybe 10 years old, standing proudly next to a custom-built walker. The boy's smile was uneven, his eyes bright with effort. "My brother," she said. 12 years ago, you probably don't remember." He remembered. That kid had been nearly paralyzed after a car crash. The doctors said he'd never walk again. Elias had driven 8 hours to deliver that walker himself, not because anyone asked, because he believed the boy deserved one made just for him. "I never forgot what you did," the CEO said. "None of us did." There was a pause. Then she looked around his modest kitchen, the dented kettle, the taped window, the photo of Matteo still sitting near the coffee canister. "You built something the world doesn't even know how to measure. And today we treated you like you didn't belong." She took a deep breath. "I came to ask you something. I want you to join us, not just as an employee. I want you to lead something bigger. I've just approved the creation of a new division, Human Impact. It's meant to find and fund real changemakers, people who do the work before the spotlight arrives. I want you to design it, build it, run it." Elias didn't respond right away. He looked down at the photo again. The same boy smiling through pain because someone had believed in him. "Why now?" he finally asked. Her answer was quiet but direct. "Because today I saw a room full of people trying to sound impressive, and one man who had already done something that mattered." She handed him a folder. Inside were signed approvals, a generous salary, a commitment to fund Horizonte Vivo, and the authority to hire his own team. Elias sat back. The same man who hours earlier had questioned if any of it was worth it, now held an invitation to amplify everything he had ever built. But still, he hesitated, not because he didn't believe in the offer, but because people like him weren't used to being believed in. She noticed his silence and added, almost as a whisper, "There are kids out there waiting for your next project. I just want to help you get there faster." And in that moment, something shifted, not in the room, in him. The next morning, Elias arrived at the same building where he had been dismissed less than 24 hours earlier. But this time he wasn't carrying a worn-out folder. He didn't wear the same wrinkled blazer, and he wasn't alone. Behind him walked the CEO. The security guard who had barely acknowledged him the day before now stood at attention. The receptionist, the same one who hadn't looked up from her screen, rose with a stunned expression, eyes darting from Elias to the woman beside him. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He just nodded politely and stepped into the elevator. Floor 18, HR department. When the doors opened, a silence fell over the room. One by one, the people who had laughed, whispered, and dismissed him turned. A few froze. One slowly closed their laptop, as if preparing for a scolding. The CEO addressed them calmly but clearly. "I'm here to introduce someone who'll be leading a new initiative for our company. He's not new to leadership. He's just new to the recognition." Then she turned to Elias. "Would you like to say a few words?" He hesitated, then stepped forward. "I'm not here for revenge," he said. "I'm here because the work I do, the work we'll do together, is bigger than anyone's opinion of how a man should dress or what he should carry in his hands." He paused. "I was tested yesterday, not just professionally, but personally. I sat here and questioned if the world had any more use for people like me, people who build quietly, who don't speak in buzzwords, who believe in results that can't be quantified in charts." Then he looked at the group. "But I've realized something. Maybe the world doesn't need fewer of us. Maybe it needs more." A long silence followed. No one laughed now, no one looked away. Some looked down, ashamed. And then, almost quietly, the woman who hadn't laughed the day before stepped forward. She looked Elias in the eye. "I remember your foundation," she said. "My cousin was part of your music program in Itapeva. She couldn't speak until she joined." Elias smiled, a soft recognition in his eyes. The moment wasn't theatrical. There was no applause. But something real had shifted in that space. A recognition not just of Elias, but of the kind of power that doesn't wear a suit. Back at home that night, Elias returned to his small desk. He opened the same folder he had brought to the interview. This time it wasn't holding rejection. It was holding a blueprint, the beginnings of the Human Impact Division. He began sketching ideas, mobile therapy units, scholarships for caregivers, partnerships with rural clinics, and then he paused, looked at the photo of his son, Matteo, and whispered, "We're not done." Word spread faster than anyone expected. At the end of the week, news of the new Human Impact Division made its way through every department, and whispers turned into conversations. The company intranet featured a headline no one could have predicted just days before. From rejected applicant to department founder, meet Elias Montenegro. But Elias didn't attend the meetings they scheduled in his honor. He didn't show up to the press shoot with PR. Instead, he spent his first week back where he felt most useful, on the ground. He drove to Horizonte Vivo's oldest center, in Vale Azul, where the paint was peeling and the chairs still wobbled. He greeted every child by name, listened to every caregiver's concern, and when one of the mothers asked him if the rumors were true, he smiled and simply said, "They're letting us go further now." Back at headquarters, however, not everyone was at ease. The HR director, the same one who had rushed Elias out of the interview, requested a private meeting. He apologized, at first stiffly, then genuinely, admitting he had never reviewed Elias's application properly. "I judged you too quickly," he said. Elias nodded. He didn't absolve nor accuse. "People do," he replied softly. But the real moment of change came days later, when the CEO invited Elias to speak at the quarterly leadership summit. It was the most high-profile event in the company. Executives, partners, and investors all gathered in the same glass auditorium that once seemed too pristine for a man in worn shoes. Elias walked onto the stage. No script, no slides. He looked out at hundreds of well-dressed professionals and said, "When I started my foundation, I had no staff, no budget, just a memory of my son's hands clapping to music he couldn't name." He paused. "I'm not here to inspire. I'm here to remind you that purpose isn't a slogan, it's a decision. And if the people you serve can't feel it, then maybe you're not serving anyone." The room was silent. Then came the applause. It didn't explode. It rose, slowly, like people remembering how to clap for something that mattered. Later, that evening, a young intern approached him quietly. She had tears in her eyes. "My brother has Down syndrome," she said, "and you just made me feel like I'm not crazy for wanting to do more." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was an invitation to spend a week at Horizonte Vivo. "You'll come back different," he said. And she did. In the weeks that followed, applications flooded in, not for jobs, but for volunteer work. Executives who had never stepped foot in a clinic signed up for immersion days. One manager asked to redirect her department's year-end bonus to build a new therapy wing in Nova Aurora. Something had changed, not just in policy, in people, and it all began with a man who almost believed he wasn't needed anymore. The irony didn't escape him. Just 2 months ago, Elias had walked through the same glass doors and been dismissed without a second thought. Now he was invited back, not as a guest, not as a candidate, but as a board advisor. The HR team had been restructured. The receptionist greeted him with a nervous smile and a fresh cup of coffee, not out of fear, out of respect. But the man who returned wasn't interested in replays of humiliation or poetic justice. Elias didn't look for apologies. He looked for alignment, people ready to work for something real. He brought with him 3 caregivers from Horizonte Vivo. One of them, Clarice, had once lived in a car with her non-verbal daughter. Today, she was head of operations at the newest center. Elias introduced her to the board with one sentence. She didn't study business, she studied survival. No one in the room questioned her qualifications. Over the next few weeks, Elias used his platform to redirect funds, challenge token efforts, and push for transparency. He asked uncomfortable questions during meetings. Do we track how our programs affect single mothers in rural areas? Who decides what success looks like? Why are the brochures more polished than the clinics? Some squirmed. Others listened. And then came the email. One of the former interviewers, the man who had ridiculed Elias's folder and cut his interview short, wrote a public post on the company's internal platform. It began simply, "I was wrong. He didn't make excuses." He detailed what he saw that day in the lobby. The way Elias had waited patiently, the way no one helped him pick up the paper he dropped, the way they all missed the only candidate who had actually built something from the ground up. It ended with, "If this company truly wants to lead in human impact, then it needs to follow the example of the man we once ignored." The post went viral inside the organization. People began sharing stories of how they too had dismissed someone because of a first impression. An intern wrote, "I used to think power looked like a title. Now I think it looks like compassion." Meanwhile, Elias kept his rhythm. He declined interviews. He asked that his face not appear on marketing materials. When asked why, he simply said, "I don't need my name on the door. I need it on the list of people who did the work. But even so, my stories have a way of spreading." A documentary crew reached out after visiting one of the therapy centers. They had spoken to Nina, a girl who had once refused to speak for 2 years after a traumatic loss. Now with Elias's programs, she was not only speaking, she was teaching sign language to other children. The crew showed her a photo of Elias and asked, "Do you know him?" She nodded. "He's the man who listens when I don't know how to talk." That line became the opening quote of the documentary. And suddenly Elias's quiet impact had a voice louder than any press release. Still, in the quiet of his home, he remained the same man. He still brewed tea in a chipped mug, still scribbled ideas on napkins, still walked slowly through the halls of Horizonte Vivo, not as a founder, but as a presence, a reminder that goodness doesn't always shout, but when it's real, it echoes. It was a Tuesday morning when the unexpected happened. Again, the company held a surprise ceremony to honor Elias, unveiling a new initiative, the Elias Montenegro Fellowship, a full scholarship for underprivileged students who wanted to study therapy, education, or community health. The announcement came with applause, cameras, and executives in tailored suits trying to look casual. Elias? He had no idea it was coming. When his name was called to the stage, he paused mid-conversation with a janitor named Paolo, a man he'd just met 5 minutes earlier. "I'll be right back," he said with a smile, then turned and walked slowly to the podium. They handed him a plaque. He accepted it with both hands, not out of pride, but out of gravity. Then he looked at the room and said, "I never did any of this for recognition, but if this helps someone else do the work, then I'm grateful." He didn't speak long. He didn't cry. But his voice, steady and slow, cut deeper than any speech that day. Later in the hallway, a former executive who once avoided eye contact with Elias approached him. "My daughter was diagnosed with autism last year," the man said. "And your story gave me hope." Elias didn't say much, just placed a hand on the man's shoulder and nodded. That became his way. He didn't seek change by storming rooms. He walked into them with quiet clarity and left them rearranged. The end of the quarter, the Human Impact Division had launched 3 new satellite centers across underserved areas. One of them opened in a village where internet still ran on borrowed cables, and children shared one worn-out textbook. Elias stood at the entrance, watching as local kids touched a computer for the first time, giggling and wide-eyed. One of them, a boy with a stutter, walked up and said, "Thank you, mister." Elias kneeled down and whispered, "Don't thank me, just promise you'll pass it on." And that was the core of his legacy. Not buildings, not programs, not awards, but the seed of kindness passed forward, quietly, powerfully, unstoppably. In time, even those who once laughed at him would say his name with respect, not because they had been forced to, but because they had been changed by proximity to something rare, the rarest kind of strength, the kind that never needs to prove itself, but always ends up proving everything. In a world obsessed with appearances, Elias Montenegro reminded everyone that the quietest person in the room might be carrying the loudest truth. He was never the loudest voice, never the one to raise a hand first, but somehow when he spoke, people leaned in, not because of charisma, but because of weight. His words came with history, with heart, with proof. And yet, even with all he built, Elias never stopped dressing the same, never traded his old shoes for shinier ones. Because for him, purpose didn't need a wardrobe change. It needed consistency. There was a lesson he repeated often to interns, volunteers, even executives who came seeking inspiration. Be kind before you know who someone is, not after. That's where the world gets it backwards. We teach respect as a reward, not a default. We wait for resumes, titles, LinkedIn pages before deciding someone is worth our decency. But Elias, he started with kindness, always, even when it wasn't returned, especially then, and maybe that's what made him unforgettable. Not the projects, not the honors, but the fact that no matter how high he climbed, he never looked down. He looked beside him, ahead, backwards, but never down. His story wasn't about revenge, success, or triumph over enemies. It was about staying good when the world gave you every reason not to. Because real strength isn't built in spotlights. It's built in silence, in rejection, in the quiet decision to show up again, even when the world tells you you're not enough, and in choosing again and again to help anyway. So the next time you're tempted to judge someone by what they wear, what they carry, or how they speak, remember Elias. Remember that the man you ignore today might be the one holding the solution you'll need tomorrow. And maybe, just maybe, the kindest person in the room is the one who's already changed lives you'll never hear about. If this story moved you, wait until you see what happened to the man who was laughed out of a hotel lobby and what he did next.